Dear church, let's talk about the consumer versus the coworker in the church. Hello and welcome to the Dear Church podcast. I've got my sidekick, cohort, partner in crime, involvement minister at the Oldham Lane Church of Christ, Jake Sledge, with me again today. Thanks for being here.
Good to be here.
We're going to talk a little bit about consumerism in the church, how that has kind of become a model today within churches, and talk about that versus what it means to actually be a coworker in the church. We're calling this the consumer versus the coworker. You know, someone once observed that Christopher Columbus went out not knowing where he was going. When he got there, he didn't know where he was. And when he got back, he didn't know where he had been. And he did it all on other people's money. And I think that's often the way many people operate within the confines of religion. They don't know where they are. They don't know where they have been. They don't know where they're going. And they're doing it all on borrowed time, borrowed money, borrowed thinking. And I think amid all this confusion, we need a definite direction. We need a compass, because there are a variety of flavors of different religions and churches out there. So it can be all very confusing. The waters can be muddied, and we can't always rely on our own instincts or even on the advice of others. So where I'm going with all this is because religion and church often becomes externally focused, people tend to garner the mentality that religion and spirituality and church is all about them. And so this feeds a consumer mindset. And we haven't really helped ourselves in this area. It's been my opinion that, for so long we talk about, hey, the church has something for you. We've got something for all ages. We've got something for the little kids. We got something for your teens. We've got something for the young adults. And then, we reach a certain age and, the preacher says, well, it's not about you. And you think, well, why not? It's always been about me. I mean, why is it all of a sudden not about me? And don't get me wrong, I think it's great to have programs and different things for different age groups, but we've kind of bred this consumer mentality even within the church, but you see it across the religious landscape so often, is this consumer mindset about what can the church do for me? And when you really scan through the New Testament, you really dig deep really in the scriptures and look at what the New Testament church was about, that model's not biblical at all. Right. And so I kind of want to start there. Talk a little bit, if you would, about consumerism, kind of what it is and how it has infiltrated the church.
Something I was reading about not too long ago, and we even talked about this in a class at the end of last year, was that the church really is, especially perhaps in America, is at a tipping point. And that tipping point being in two ways, theological and attitudinal. And in the theological way, where we're seeing slippage in Jesus not being the only way to heaven or the only way to be saved, and also a slippage in the view of the absolute authority of Scripture. Mm-hmm. So there's that. Then there's also attitudinal, which gets to what our subject is today, and that is that it's very consumer-driven, and in fact, it's churches accommodating the wishes and even the demands of guests, of visitors. We come in and we want this, we expect this, we are entitled to this. After all, we're giving our money, and if you want that and you want us, we want this. And that's what consumerism is, the supply and demand, and churches have been really too happy to accommodate all of that.
Yeah, it's kind of like the country club atmosphere. I pay my dues by contributing my money, and I expect certain things in return, certain privileges and certain rights. When you talk about, when I was a teenager, I worked at a grocery store, and, one thing that you always heard was the customer is always right. And so the church goer, the guest, the visitor comes in looking for a certain place to land, and they come to a certain church, and, they feel like a customer. What are you going to do for me? Mm-hmm. And you got to do something for me to make me want to stay. And like you said, all too often we're accommodating of that. But really, when you look through the New Testament, you especially look at Paul's writings to the churches, what you find out is that the customer is not always right. In fact, the customer is always wrong, if you want to put it in those terms, which is why he needed a savior, and that this is not about you at all. But what happens so often is folks come to church with an empty basket and say, fill it for me. Mm-hmm. Yeah. When in reality, what we should be doing is coming to church with a full basket, trying to empty it by giving everything that we have, right?
Yeah.
Would you agree with that?
I do. And with our new members, we do a few times a year, we do new members and new Christians day that includes a class. And one of the things we talk about is the bib versus apron. And so we'll put the pictures up there on the screen and ask members, what do these mean? What do they say about being a new member, a new Christian? So obviously wearing a bib is you feed me. I sit in a high chair, you take care of me. Clean up my mess, all of that sort of thing, versus the apron where I'm the one getting to work. But then I remember someone in that class one time pointed out, you really need to be wearing both. Sure. And I thought that was a great point because everybody needs to be fed and everybody's going to have a mess that they need help cleaning up. And so there's a role there for the church, obviously, but everybody ought to be wearing a bib. So we really need an apron as well. So we really need to be wearing both. But so often we come in just with that bib and we want that food and we want you to even put it in our mouths for us,
Yeah. So you're not necessarily talking about a consumer versus a coworker on every level. It's maybe not versus, but maybe and in both, because you are a consumer in the sense that you should be looking for a place that will feed you. Now, I've always said, if you expect the church to be the only source of nourishment spiritually, then you're really going to be malnourished because you've got to learn to be a self-feeder. At some point, you've got to learn how to feed yourself. But when you come to church, you should be fed. At the same time, you should also be wearing that apron, rolling those sleeves up, and being a coworker because, again, when you look at the first church, they were definitely a doing church. They were a moving church, and they were always involved in preaching and teaching the gospel. And so that requires you to roll up your sleeves and to get dirty, right? And so I think what you're saying is there is a sense when you're always a consumer. I do think that that's unfortunate within some churches is that I've always said that maybe the least fed group or the most overlooked group within the church are probably your elderly members. I think everybody just assumes they know this stuff, so we don't have to go over it with them, or we neglect our older members because, we all like the young families. We all like to have babies in the church, and we all talk about, this is the future of the church, and we want to be appealing to families, and put up a playground or build a gym or whatever to attract those young families. And meanwhile, our older members are saying, well, we're not done yet. We still want to get fed.
Yeah, that's right. And just because they have gray hair and they've been in the church a long time doesn't mean they've grown spiritually, or even if they are mature, it doesn't mean they're done. You never stop growing. You never stop learning. So we've got to expect out of them spiritual growth, spiritual maturity, contribution to the degree people are physically, able to, and that sort of thing. And then there's the people who are widowed and widowers. That's that or just never married. They're single, and so those are groups of people that they need the church just as well. And so these things, the idea of consumer, I think we can take that too far. But for a church to say, or if someone visiting to say, hey, it'd be great to have a clean nursery where people are happy to receive the babies and they teach them songs, and they, it'd be great to have great kids' Bible classes, a youth group. So those things are not wrong. We're not trying to say that, but it's when I walk in and demand, and so often people visiting or even members, even maybe without realizing it, they walk in and they want this fully prepared, fully customized church, customized to their preferences. Yeah. And that's where there's a problem with who's this really about, when you get to that point.
Well, and kind of piggybacking off of that, let's talk a little bit about the responsibility of church members. I know we talk about this a lot in the church that we serve. What are the responsibilities of church members for our guests? Those folks that are coming, they're maybe they're church shopping, maybe they are just looking for a church home, maybe they have just moved to town, maybe they have left a church because of something that they didn't agree with. Whatever the reason, what is our responsibility, or what do you think the responsibility of the members is to make them feel welcome and to plug them in?
Well, one of the first things is, and it has to be driven in other words, that message has to be driven repeatedly, is that it's everybody's job. So it's not just the preacher's job. It's not just the old people's job who care about saying hello to people. It's not just a couple of greeters or some people like that. It's every single person's
Not the preacher's job only.
Right.
Yeah.
And so if you don't know the person, it's your job to go say hello to them, whether they're a visitor or a member you just don't know yet. So think about a person's experience dropping their kids off at class, and the teacher never greets them, engages them, gets to know them, and they just simply take their kid and then turn their kid back in. We can do better than that. Sure. Or coming through the door, even in the parking lot, sitting down in the auditorium. So, don't let people sit by themselves. Don't let them walk into a Bible class and you stare at them. And many of us have had this experience, especially when it's round tables.
Right.
And all the tables are full, the seats are full, and they've got to go sit at another table and start a new table. And you're going to let a visitor do that?
Right.
Or even a new member? No, you get up and go sit with them.
Sure.
Yeah, leave your friends. They'll be okay and you'll be okay. And go sit with them. So there's just that sensitivity and mindfulness, really, I think, is a key word to that. Mindfulness of others instead of what I'm doing, what I want to talk about, the people I want to see.
Sure.
And that's this, mindfulness is being other-centered. And I think there's some other things to do as a church. We've got to look at what are we doing and what can we do better in just some systemic things, greeters, whatever, welcoming people in a class, opening up your classes, welcoming people, those kinds of things. Not that everybody has to stand and, I think you can go too far and embarrass people, but making people feel welcome in the way that you treat them and the things that you say. One of the things that we try to push and even talk about with our elders is that we need to be intentional in some things like making visitors feel welcome and blessed from being there.
Right.
And so when they leave, they need to feel blessed by the worship, the study, and the fellowship is the way I think of it. And then how do we integrate new members? How do we keep up with current members? And then how do we reach our community? So that those things should be like top priority. And I don't mean they take the place of truth, but in terms of how we treat others, how we, welcome others, how we interact with others and what we do, the people side of things, those need to be priority.
Well, and I can hear the echo of someone out there maybe saying, well, we just need to be about the truth and that's what we need to focus on and all this other stuff is really secondary and all that. And I don't disagree that certainly we need to be about truth and we need to hold the Bible in highest esteem and all of that. But people need to wrap their minds around the fact, if they have that kind of mindset, that folks that are coming in from the outside a lot of times don't know truth.
Yeah.
And so we've got to stop expecting people to come in through our doors and be at our level right off the bat, and then we'll talk with you, or then that's kind of what we have, these expectations that are just unrealistic.
Yeah.
And, people, the old saying is people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. I think many people in the world, you say, well, they're searching for truth and all. I don't know. I don't even know if they know what truth is. I don't know if a lot of people in our world would know truth if it slapped them in the face. And so I think where you hit people first is with love and compassion and showing them that you give them a warm welcome and that you're glad that they're there, and use that as a springboard for truth and those kind of things that are certainly very important, of highest importance, really, when it comes to the message that we deliver, the being about Jesus and the gospel and all that. But we're not saying that those things are unimportant. But if you just expect people to come in and be at your level right off the bat, that's a very, very bad expectation. Yeah. And it's not going to prove fruitful. Yeah. But if you bring people through the doors and you love them, you welcome them, and you give them a soft place to land, you have a much better chance of reaching them with the truth.
Yeah. That's much better chance than not being loving and not being warm and kind. And so which one's going to work? Well,
exactly.
Only one of those is going to work. And hospitality is a biblical concept.
Sure it is.
Now, we're saying that doesn't replace truth. Mm-hmm. But to me, how can you claim we're just going to preach the truth and yet you don't have to practice hospitality when it is part of God's truth.
Yeah, we create a false dichotomy
Yeah.
there, or a lot of times we do this in our arguments. We say we give an either or, and it doesn't have to be either or.
We shouldn't make people have to choose.
No, you don't have to have a choice here. I mean, you can have both. You can preach the truth in love. You can be warm and welcoming and all those kind of things. And in fact, we should be that. But I will say this. I believe that the guest has a responsibility as well, don't you?
Absolutely.
And what I see it all too often. A person comes to visit church. They don't come to Bible class. They come in late. They sit by themselves. They leave early. And
they sit in the back.
They sit in the back, come in late, leave early, and then consider the church to be unfriendly. Nobody spoke to them and all these kind of things. And I'm like, nobody knew you were here.
And we've even had at least a couple of times when someone wrote it on a card or through an email, and they said, no one talked to me.
Yes.
And because nobody knew you were here.
Yes.
You know?
Yeah.
So,
you've got, I think, talk a little bit about what's the responsibility of a guest, because I think there's a two-way street here.
There really is. And I think the guest has to have the right mentality going in. And so I can't expect to go in late, not go to class, go in late, leave early, sit in the back, keep my head down, don't even try to be approachable or approach others. And worship's already started, and before that last prayer says amen, I'm starting my vehicle. And what else can I expect? And so that guest responsibility, I think, are there's legitimate wants, but the guest has a responsibility to be friendly. Make an effort to be there at least a few minutes before things start, and take a little bit of time getting out of there. So in other words, give people a fair chance. Now, if you're a guest and you've given us a fair chance, in other words, you were there in time for people to be friendly to you and talk to you. Did you, for churches that use a card, did you fill out a card? That's a great way for churches to, whatever they do, send you a follow-up email, card, phone call. We do really all of that. Some even do home visits and take them, homemade banana bread or something like that. We've know churches that do that. So all of those are good things, but you're not giving people a chance at all to do any of that. Stay a few minutes after and exchange your name, meet people, let them meet you. Now, if you've done those things and we weren't kind to you and we didn't treat you right, that's fair, and hopefully you'll even tell us about it or tell the church.
We'd like to know
because there's room for improvement, and there's always room for improvement. I think the church that's doing the very best they can, people are still going to fall through the cracks. You're still going to miss some things, and hopefully you hear back about that so you can even know about it and do better.
Yeah, ideally you'd like to receive the benefit of the doubt. I'm not trying to get churches off the hook here and in the way that they treat guests or visitors. But I do think what I've noticed more than a few times is someone coming in and giving the bare minimum and expecting the maximum. And that's not fair. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to the church that you're visiting. You can't give the bare minimum and expect the maximum. I do think it's a two-way street. I do think that the guest should be seeking to give the benefit of the doubt where they can, and like you said, communicating that maybe, we didn't, maybe weren't as welcoming as they would have liked and all that kind of stuff. And, we've had folks that come in and, say, well, nobody talked to me. Well, I mean, I know the greeter did because I just saw them, and so I think in some ways, like you said, somebody will always fall through the cracks. I also think that in some ways there are times when you can't win. I think you just have to know that going in because some folks are so consumer driven that you're not going to meet the items on their wish list and you're not going to please them no matter what you do. I think, sometimes even your best efforts are going to fall short because maybe the expectations were unrealistic or whatever. And so you just kind of know that going in. But I think, like you said, if we're doing everything we can, some people don't want you visiting them at their house, for a long time. And it maybe even still so. I hadn't looked recently, but some studies would say, hey, I don't know who did the research, but you need to within 24, 48 hours, go and visit the guest at their house. Well, I mean, I know a lot of folks now that they don't want you doing that,
Yeah.
especially young families. They're pulling their hair out, trying to get kids ready for bed and all that. They don't want you showing up at their door unexpected.
Yeah, they don't want you to see the laundry all in the living room.
Exactly.
And kids crying and trying to bathe kids, whatever.
Door knocking works in some places, doesn't work in other places.
Yeah.
So, I mean,
what works in your area?
Exactly.
And do that. And I think if a church is genuinely trying and that guest is genuinely trying, then they're going to meet somewhere and there's going to be some good contact if both are really being sincere about, hey, let's see what happens here and let's make this a good experience. But so both have to be intentional about that. So like you were saying, a guest can't come in and think, after one visit, I'm going to be best friends with the preacher and I'm going to be, but you may not even get to meet the preacher depending on the size or what's happening that day.
Right.
That's okay. And also you may go in and maybe the guy leading singing or the guy who did announcements was as dull as he could be.
Right.
And you're like, my goodness, that was terrible. Well, why don't you go, tonight? When we were looking for a new church home, we visited Oldham Lane for 1 month, Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night. Solid.
Yep.
Before we even considered making a decision, because I wanted to hear the sermons. I wanted to meet elders. I wanted to sit in Bible class with various teachers. I wanted to know, how do people treat us? Do they remember us? And every single time it was a good experience. Of course I could pick apart anything, but every single time, if you give people a chance, a church who's trying to do their best, they're gonna do a good job on that. And
it reminds me of some elders in churches when they're looking for a preacher.
Yeah,
they will show up on a Sunday randomly to hear the guy that they are maybe considering to be their preacher. They'll go to wherever he's at in his current job, and they'll just show up on a Sunday, sit in the back, and listen to him preach. And the reasoning is that, well, he can send them a sermon on audio or a video, and his best one. Yeah. Anybody can knock it out of the park one time. I say anybody, but most people can knock it out of the park one time. Let's see you on a regular basis on a normal Sunday, not visit on Easter or on Christmas when you've got a home run sermon ready to deliver because you've got all these guests there. I mean, what's a normal Sunday look like? And it's the same way in visiting. I think you may visit on Easter and it'd be great and it'd be outstanding and all that, but I think what you did is exactly a good recipe for people is, come for a month or an extended period of time and come to every service and get a feel and make a sound decision, an educated decision based on everything you've seen, the consistency of it or inconsistency, whatever it may be. And I think that's a good way of looking at it. I think, you make a better decision that way.
Yeah, I think so.
But here's the thing, and I don't know that we can control this, or anybody can, but if you're a guest, what are really the things you should be looking for anyway? I mean, if you're looking for a church home, everybody's got a list. And I think that we would have to admit, most people would have to admit, that a lot of the things on our list are pretty shallow. I mean, not for everybody, but for a lot of folks, it's consumer driven. And the first church was not consumer driven. The first church was mission minded. It was Christ focused. It was all about doing the work of the Lord. So if I'm going into this saying, okay, do they have playground? Check. Do they have a good children's program? Which is not a bad thing necessarily. Right. Do they have a good youth group? Not a bad thing necessarily. But we know of folks that have stayed in a church that maybe wasn't teaching right things, but their kids love the youth group. So I mean, are we putting the first things first that we should be looking for on the list? And what are those things? What should we really be looking for if we're looking for a church?
Yeah. And that's key, is what has to be priority and and understanding the priorities or the placements of all those things. I mean, we've had over the years someone who didn't think our philosophy for missions in a particular area wasn't the way they thought it should be. And we even knew that, and so they didn't like that, and that was their thing. I mean, that doesn't even make sense.
Yeah, but I'm out of here because you don't have the same philosophy.
Yeah, you didn't do that the way I would do it. Right. And we're not talking about core biblical truths here.
Right.
We're talking about an approach.
Yeah,
among approaches. Yeah, and or the same thing might be about a peripheral issue. You know, do you take the exact stance I take on this? You know, whatever it is, that's not a core salvation biblical kind of issue, but I'd sacrifice all these other things as long as you line up on this one thing. And that's so out of alignment, you know. And then when you think about your family, your kids, you know, where are you going to end up and where are they going to end up if that's how you're approaching how you choose to go, you know, where to worship at. Yeah. Where to be a member. So,
yeah, I put some things down here. These are 3 questions that I think we should ask, anybody should ask when searching for a church home. So 3 questions I think anyone should ask when searching for a church home. Number 1, what can I do to help this church? So you walk into a church and you're thinking about, you know, placing membership there and being a part of that family. You know, ask the question, where can I dig in here? How can I help this? Where can I contribute? You know, typically the question is reversed. What can this church do for me? What can it do for my family? And again, that's not always a bad question to ask. These are certainly valid questions, but we should be going further by asking, what does this church need me to do? You know, Romans 12, 4-8 speaks of the fact that there are many members in the Lord's body with many different functions, but all have to do a function. Every member has a role. Every member must carry out that role. So Paul is not catering to a consumer-driven mindset. He's saying everyone needs to get to work. We all have a job to do. So the first question is, what can I do to help this church? The second question would be, will the preacher challenge me and will the elders hold me accountable? You should want that. I mean, this seems like a rather, you know, absurd question with the mentality of a consumer, but you know what? I wouldn't attend a congregation where the preacher didn't seek to help me be better. Yeah. You know, if he's not going to help me be better, then I don't think I want to be there. And I sure wouldn't attend a congregation where the elders weren't willing to discipline me or to say, hey, Chris, you're wrong. You can't be doing this, and we want to help you through it, but we're not gonna sign off on this. If I'm veering off track, or there should be a desire to help me, not to pour syrup in my ears and tell me that I'm okay. I don't want the preacher filling me with fluff and this cotton candy kind of theology stuff. You know, you think about it, what's more important? Yeah. I mean, what's church about? It's about getting to heaven. I mean, it's about living the Christian life so I can get to heaven. If I want to go to heaven, then I want someone there who's going to help me to get there. And I want leadership that's going to hold me accountable. So I would say, will the preacher challenge me and will the elders hold me accountable is the second question. And then the third question, I think, is, will this church ask me to sacrifice? And I think in a culture driven by consumerism, or the customer is always right mentality, this is a really absurd question. I mean, will this church ask me to sacrifice? I mean, so many churchgoers want to go to a church where they can sit and be a pew potato instead of a couch potato. They can be a pew potato and they can just sit there and not be asked to do anything, not be required to do anything. Let me be, leave me alone. I just want to come and sit and leave. Yeah. And that's not what you read about in the biblical model, you know, of what church is. So many people don't want to go all in, but is this church going to ask me to sacrifice my time and my energy, my money maybe even? Most people are not willing to do that. And I love what 2 Samuel 24:24, David had sinned and he sought to offer God a sacrifice. And there's a man present by the name of Araunah, and he is starstruck and basically says to David, wow, it's the king. Here, take what I have to offer. I'd be honored if you used my threshing floor, my oxen, my yokes. And David says, no, but I will surely buy it from you for a price, for I will not offer burnt offerings to the Lord, my God, which cost me nothing. I love that. David was willing to sacrifice. He wanted to sacrifice. He didn't want something that was given or handed to him. He wanted to sacrifice for it. And man, wouldn't that be a great mentality for people to have when they're looking for a church home? Do you really want to be a part of a church that costs you nothing? You know, I mean, because Christianity is going to interfere with your life. If you're truly following Jesus, it will interfere with your life and it will cost you something. consumers never look at it that way, but Christianity should be marked by sacrifice. So what do you think about those questions?
Well, on that last one, I think you see the causes that people get involved in from just community issues, political, social issues, all kinds of causes, and people give everything they have to that. They give their time. They're passionate about it. They just jump in wholeheartedly because it's a cause worth giving their lives to.
Sure.
That they believe in.
Like politics.
Yeah, politics or education or what healthcare, whatever those causes might be, and that's not, and that's certainly fine to find those. But it's an example of those causes are asking something of somebody, of people, and people are going for it. And so I think that people want something worth giving their life to, and Christianity is the thing worth giving your life to. Yeah. Ultimately, it's the greatest thing, and yet we are afraid to ask people to do that, to do just that. And so if a person is a Christian and they're sincere, like you were talking about, they are digging in and there's how do I just be a devoted, full-blown follower of Christ, and they start seeing what the Scripture teaches and what the New Testament church was like, and then they say, yeah, but my church doesn't ask me to do anything except maybe my money, Right. That's a big difference there. And so what would it be like? What would the church around the world be like? And then what difference would it make in our world if we were the kind of church that asked people to give their lives to Christ?
Absolutely.
Not just that one time at conversion, but every day give your life to Christ. And that doesn't mean busy work at church either. That means legitimate things and that help spread the gospel. And that's why I think people can get, whether it be members or guests, sidetrack on peripheral issues instead of being gospel centered. I think when the church is focused on making and growing disciples, the Great Commandment and the Great Commission, then that forces you to stay gospel centered. Now, then what do we do about other issues, about topics, hot topics of the day or questions people have? Well, you look at those through the lens of what does God say about this? And so they never become the thing that drives your church, but you are able to take God's word and speak to contemporary issues.
Yes.
And instead of getting sidetracked by and driven by the contemporary issues and accommodating the masses based on what the consumer wants.
Yes, and that happens way too often as we see the veering off track and we get sidetracked by whatever the topic is, whether it's more liberal, whether it's more legalistic, whatever it is, we get lost on the side issue and get sidetracked by the side issue, and we lose sight of what we're supposed to be about. Because you can't read through the New Testament and look at the church and see Paul's letters, read the book of Acts, and not come to the conclusion that the church was about Jesus and about the mission of the gospel. That's what it was about. So, based on that, we can rightly conclude if your church is not about Jesus and the gospel, first and foremost, it's not a true church.
Yeah.
It's just not. It's not the church that Jesus established. You can think you're doing right things all you want. I heard it said like this: you can be straight as a gun barrel doctrinally, but empty as a gun barrel spiritually. If you are not about Jesus and the gospel first and foremost, you're not the true church.
Yeah.
Now, doesn't mean that you can't approach those other topics. Doesn't mean that the side issues can't come up or that they can't even be preached on and all that and taught about, because sometimes they force your hand and you have to discuss them because of things that are going on around you and in the church and all that. But if your main mission is not the gospel and Jesus Christ, you're not the true church.
Well, good works are talked about in the Bible, taught, expected of us. But if we're doing good works all day long, we can do good works every day till eternity comes, and yet not convert anybody, and yet not teach lost souls the gospel. So that's ultimately what you have to be about. The good works, see, truth demands ministry, and ministry comes out of the truth. And so by speaking the truth in love, by staying focused on the Great Commandment and Great Commission, then ministry will come out of that.
Sure.
And speaking about other issues will come out of that. And so that's where your good works come from. And so then how you treat guests, how your members treat guests, how you, help your members mature, those kinds of things, all comes out of being focused on the main thing.
I think that's a great way to wrap up, is that it's about Jesus and the gospel being the catalyst for everything else that we do.
Yeah.
When that's driving the ship, all those other things will fall into place. Like we've said before, you get God right, you get everything right.
Yep.
It's a trickle-down effect. So thank you so much for tuning in, for watching and or listening. We hope that you'll spread the word about the Dear Church podcast, share it on Facebook, continue to tune in and watch and listen. We thank you so much for your time and attention. Until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Sincerely, Chris and Jake.